Bonsoir. Soyez les bienvenus. I am Marie-Monique Steckel, and I am the president of the French Institute d'Alliance Française, and we call it FIAF, as you all probably know. I am personally delighted that you're all going to lift your spirits tonight. It is, when we discussed the date, we said, oh, it will be after the election, and we will rejoice. And tonight we're going to rejoice about the art of sex and seduction. And this evening is the part of the fourth season that we have this wonderful series. And it's been very, very interesting, and I'm sure that you will enjoy this evening very, very much. Our curator has been Erika Lumière from the start. She is a talented writer and senior editor at very many women's magazines. And it's been a pleasure working with her all these years. And she just will have some question and answers after the panel, but after the discussion. And once the talk is finished, you can go and buy all the books of all the panelists in the auditorium upstairs. And I hope you buy a lot. And I thank you very much for coming. And here is Erika Lumière, and she's going to introduce you to all the panelists.
Merci Marie-Monique. Good evening. My name is Erika Lumière, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the Art of Sex and Seduction. This is my 4th year as curator of this series, and I couldn't be happier with these talks. We've explored topics ranging from love, sex, and dating to marriage, jealousy, and infidelity. But I think tonight's program is extra special. Here we are, only 2 days after an historic election involving the first female nominee of a major party in America in a presidential race that was far closer than most people had predicted. As many of us try to process the outcome of this election, it occurred to me that we also have a unique opportunity to hear what our panelists think about what this election means for women in this country. These writers represent some of the leading voices on women and sexuality, so it might be interesting to hear their thoughts. Where do we go from here? And what are their predictions about the future of love, sex, and relationships? The speakers you'll meet tonight haven't been afraid to challenge conventional thinking and push boundaries in their own careers. The truth is that women who write about sex often aren't taken seriously as writers, and frequently don't achieve the level of critical acclaim as men who write about sex, authors such as Henry Miller and Philip Roth. Erika Jong was one of the first women to break this literary double standard and write about sex from a woman's point of view. What motivates her and our other panelists to defy convention and push the sexual envelope? How do they manage the criticism they sometimes face as women writing about sex? Let's hear what our panelists have to say about all this, but please, as Marie-Monique said, save any questions you might have for the end of the night when there will be a short Q&A with the audience followed by book signing. So let's talk sex. First up, it is my great privilege to welcome to FIAF one of the world's most iconic writers, Erika Jong. Erika Jong is a poet, essayist, and author of over 25 books. Erika, come out. She's a little shy tonight, right now.
I guess, yeah.
Fear of Flying, her first and most famous novel, published in 1973, has never been out of print, selling over 27 million copies in 42 languages. Fear of Flying revolutionized the way we look at love, marriage, and sex, and opened the door for writers such as Lena Dunham. Her latest novel, Fear of Dying, is a brave but humorous look about life and death. Jong has won many awards for poetry and fiction all over the world, including the Sigmund Freud Award, the Deauville Literary Award, and the United Nations Award for Excellence in Literature. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to welcome back a great friend of Fiaf, the fabulous Toni Bentley. Toni Bentley is the author of the Vanity Fair article on hysterical literature that's in your program tonight. Bentley is a former ballerina at the New York City Ballet and danced with the company for 10 years. She's also the author of 5 books, including Winter Season, A Dancer's Journal, The Sisters of Salome, and The Surrender, an Erotic Memoir. She has written for numerous publications, including the New York Times Book Review, the LA Times, Playboy, and Vogue. Bentley is a Guggenheim Fellow and has been a featured speaker at the Oscar Wilde Society, Harvard University, Think, and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Welcome, Toni. Next, I'm thrilled to introduce for the first time to Fiaf best-selling author Amy Sohn. Amy is the author of the novels Prospect Park, Rest, Motherland, My Old Man, Run, Catch, Kiss, and The Actress. She began her career writing an autobiographical column at the New York Press called Female Trouble, and has also been a columnist at the New York Post and New York Magazine. Her articles on sex, relationships, feminism, and motherhood have appeared in numerous publications, including Harper's Bazaar, Elle, Playboy, and the New York Times. She's currently working on an original project for HBO. A graduate of Brown, Sohn lives in Brooklyn with her husband and daughter. Welcome, Amy. Next, we're very lucky to have another fantastic writer join this conversation, Daphne Merkin. Daphne began her career as a book and movie critic for The New Leader. Daphne? Former staff writer for The New Yorker and The New York Times, she's now regular contributor to Elle. Her writing frequently appears in publications such as The New York Times and Travel and Leisure. Her previous books include Enchantment, a novel, and 2 collections of essays, Dreaming of Hitler and The Fame Lunches, which was one of the New York Times Book Review's 100 Notable Books of the Year. Her upcoming book, This Close to Happy, A Reckoning with Depression, will be published this February. Welcome, Daphne. And finally, it is my pleasure to present our moderator, who I understand also brought some of her students from Columbia here tonight. So I guess class is in session with Professor Elisabeth Ladenson. Elisabeth got her BA from the University of Pennsylvania, spending 2 years in Paris and earning a degree at Paris 7 Jussieu along the way. She later went on to get her PhD in French literature at Columbia. Early in her career, she taught in the French department at the University of Virginia and has held visiting positions at Rice and Berkeley. In 2005, she returned to Columbia, where she teaches mostly 19th and 20th century French lit, as well as an introduction to Western literature class. Professor Ladenson is the author of 2 books, Proust's Lesbianism and Dirt for Art's Sake, books on trial from Madame Bovary to Lolita. Her articles have appeared in many publications, including the London Review of Books and the Daily Beast. She's currently working on a book about Colette. Let's give a warm welcome to all our speakers.
So thank you very much. Thanks to Fiaf, thanks to Erica Lumiere, and thanks to everyone present for having crawled through the smoldering wreckage of our once proud democracy in order to be here this evening. I feel that it would be inappropriate to start we're here to talk about sex, but luckily we have a president-elect who likes talking about sex, so we can just make this segment. I thought I would probably get hauled off the stage for saying that, but it's true. I mean, you've got to admit that it's true. So I thought we could maybe start by just saying a few words, by inviting these fantastically brilliant and accomplished authors to say a few words about misogyny, the large part played by misogyny in the election. And I am going to abuse my position as moderator by starting off with 3 brief observations. that I've been dying to say in a public forum ever since this happened. One of them is that when in 1992, I had just moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, when Bill Clinton was elected president, and thus for 8 years, every single day I went out of my house and I saw bumper stickers that said, "Impeach the president and her husband too." And I've thought of this all throughout the election because that made me realize, sometimes they were on the back of pickup trucks, but not always, some of them with gun racks. But this made me realize that the mere presence of Hillary Clinton in the government being given in Washington being given some sort of role as perhaps policymaker was enough to make much of America feel castrated. And so I think that was, so that's what I've thought about throughout the election. The second is that in my ceaseless and obsessive perusal of websites and TV shows throughout the election, and Fox News being something that I was horrifically drawn to on a regular basis, I noticed that a lot of the Trump supporters, the talking head Trump supporters, frequently dismiss the issue of misogyny by saying that there were a lot of women who didn't like Hillary Clinton and who were voting for Trump. And no one questioned the logic in that, but I think that it is extremely important to acknowledge that among the many things that women are at least as good at as men, misogyny is one of them, in fact. And so I think that there's a lot of misogyny among, I think that the idea of dismissing the category of misogyny because there are women involved seems insane and misguided to me. And the third thing is that I went to, that last night in my state of shell shock trauma, along with everyone else, I went to a dinner, not along with everyone else, but shell shock trauma along with everyone else. I went to a dinner following an excellent talk by a famous French historian who's a visiting faculty member in the history department at Columbia. And afterwards, at the dinner, I noticed that everyone was talking about the election, of course, and mainly what happened was so these were colleagues of mine. These were, a bunch of men basically held forth, speaking over all of the women in the room, explaining about misogyny and its role during the campaign. So I think that it's very important to acknowledge the extent to which misogyny is not something that belongs to the Republicans, and it's not entirely on the side of Trump. It's not entirely on the side of men. I think that we really need to stop dividing things in a binary fashion. With that, I will stop pontificating and invite our panelists to say a few words about this subject.
I don't think it's surprising that in a misogynistic culture, women partake of misogyny and don't trust other women. And I've certainly seen that throughout my professional life, to my horror, because I love women and I really believe that feminism is nurturing other women. And I feel like we need each other. So I find it quite horrifying. When you think of all the countries in the world that have had female leaders, it's amazing that America has not.
Well, many of them have had in the past female monarchs, though.
I'll interject because I actually brought one thing. I wanted to quickly just read a list. It was surprising to me. Just read off very quickly a few names and countries who have had female leaders.
Great.
Indira Gandhi, Golda Meir, Margaret Thatcher, Theresa May now, Angela Merkel, and then of countries of Iceland, Norway, Malta, Lithuania, Ireland, France, Poland, Switzerland, Latvia, Finland, Costa Rica, Bangladesh, Australia, my hometown, Ukraine, Denmark, and Liberia, and that's not all of them. I think that speaks for itself in a sense. What is wrong with American men?
Well, I'm still a little bit traumatized, and I don't use that word. The word is thrown around a lot, but it feels so similar to how it felt after 9/11, being a New Yorker and living through that. And I've been crying and hugging friends, and people are crying. It's so strange that would be the emotional reaction following
the
something
apocalypse.
that's part of our system, not following
Yeah,
a
this is democracy.
that-
This is democracy. I mean, I think
a
we should acknowledge
functional
that.
democracy. I'm the mother of a daughter, and I think one thing that disturbed me was, some talk of men with daughters feeling so sad about this, because I don't have a son, but I feel that this is about our future, and it's the sons and the daughters are going to grow up together, and we shouldn't be uniquely worried for youth who are female. I'm worried about the future. Okay, go ahead.
No, continue, but I mean, I had to say that.
Yeah, but I'm horrified that this man is going to be leading us. I think his views about women are repellent. So that's one set of worries and horrors that I have, and then I have a whole other set of worries and horrors that are just about his instability and international events and the economy and the environment that go toward just dread of the future in
Toni,
general.
why do you disagree? You want to say a few
Well,
words?
just so I got it right, I think you said we should worry for our sons and daughters,
Right.
not just our daughters. I mean, yes, the sons, but basically, I'm done with you guys. I'm
so glad to be here tonight.
And I'm basically heterosexual, but when I really graduate to a higher plane, I will switch. But it's just not happened yet.
We'll discuss that later on.
Yes, but what I want to say is, what I am passionate about, what I care about, what I live for, is the situation of women. Very briefly, I grew up in a perfect household of four that was a perfect little patriarchy. My father raged and tyrannized and worked. My mother cried on the kitchen floor and baked, homemade bread and three-course meals, and then at dinner everything went to shit. Okay, so I grew up under the thumb of a perfect little microcosm of patriarchy, and I have personally, I feel, been fighting my way out of that. One of the things I really want to address about women and what has been touched on here that I think is so interesting is the collusion of women in misogyny. And I am absolutely guilty, and I write about it. I don't know if I'll live long enough to become 100% the dominatrix I want to be. And when I say that, what I mean is someone who really doesn't care so much. I think that misogyny, I was thinking about this today, I feel that misogyny is born into male DNA, and it's not their fault. Their drive to produce and to have to control that woman so that child is theirs, because, we can fuck everyone.
Maybe we can rein it in just a little. We can come back to this, perhaps. Daphne, do you have
I would
comment
argue
about this?
one thing with Toni, but it isn't what I really want to go into, which is I'm not sure the dominatrix position isn't playing back into misogyny, but we could discuss that at another time. And I think one thing that worried me watching the campaign already was how downplayed the whole issue of Hillary being a woman was. She didn't play it up. She played it sort of low-key. I think young women, someone said to me yesterday, a close friend of mine, said that a student of hers said to her, well, if you pointed out the gender issue, she said, well, I don't want to vote with my vagina. Which seems to me a development unforeseen.
I didn't know you could vote with your
When we had the old ballot boxes in New York City with the lever, technically.
But I think that in a way the whole women themselves, if we've colluded at all, which I don't know if we have, we've sort of been put in our place by this election. And partly, I think, not enough fuss was made to the young by older women of the historicity of this election. I mean, I certainly tried in my way to do it for my daughter. that this was a champagne-worthy occasion, but instead it became almost a matter of apologetics, like a shuffling aside that this was the first woman. Something I think has changed in the culture about somewhere on the way post-feminism. There's been some change in the next generation about how issues of gender are looked at. And I think it also tripped Hillary up. And somewhere, and also has affected the whole sexual scene with younger women.
I think that's true.
Maybe men are afraid of women because we're known to be peacemakers.
Not
And they
always.
love war.
Well, okay, let's maybe talk about sex. In my ruminations over how to deal with attempting to moderate this unruly group, I spent a long time thinking about the fact that we have. Would you ever have a lineup like this with men? And I was I thought, well, if you, first of all, it wouldn't be called "Let's Talk Sex!" exclamation point.
No,
It wouldn't have a hot pink logo.
Helen Gurley Brown once said the exclamation point was the sexiest piece of grammar.
I so disagree. I just can't even tell you how much I disagree with it. It's actually, I'm distracted by the notion of the sexiest piece of grammar, but that's right. Okay, so first of all, it wouldn't be called "Let's Talk Sex." There would definitely not be an exclamation point. I'm not sure that men think that it's the sexiest. Women might actually, but in any case, who would you possibly get? You'd have to mostly get dead men, right? Philip Roth, still with us, but pretty old. You'd have to get Updike. So Roth, Updike, Miller. Maybe we could dig up D.H. Lawrence for the occasion. But the thing is that men have been writing about sex forever and ventriloquizing women talking about female sexuality. So women, there have been voices of female sexuality forever. In fact, there's an 18th century French novel in which there's literally ventriloquizing. There's vagina monologues of the mid-18th century written by Denis Diderot called Les Bijoux Indiscrets, the Indiscreet Jewels. And that has been basically the MO of discourses of female sexuality for many centuries. But now, so you've got, every time someone comes along and writes revolutionarily about sex, like Erica Jong with Fear of Flying, for instance, which gave us the immortal phrase zipless fuck, among other things, which, by the way, I actually, in preparing for this, I hope that you'll be impressed by this. In preparing for this, I actually got a hold of a copy of the French translation, since I'm supposed to be representing Frenchness in some way here, so Le Complexe d'Icare, the Icarus Complex,
right,
published in 1976, I believe, in France. And I looked to see how zipless fuck had been translated into French, and it is the worst translation of anything I've ever seen. It's le super baisage sans effeuillage, which if you translate it back into English, it actually means the super fuck without leaf removal.
I missed that.
Oh, it's amazing.
I missed that.
But that was just a little parenthesis. But every time someone does something like what Erica Jong, what all of these women have done, someone comes along, a male critic generally comes along and says, at last, a woman has dared to tell the truth about female sexuality. As though somehow it were always, no matter what anyone said, no matter what anyone wrote, still a mystery. So I would just toss that out there as a topic, but also I am wondering if, all of you have done outrageous things or all of you have done things perceived as outrageous and have gotten into trouble for them. And I would really love to hear some of your most horrific horror stories about responses to things that you've written.
Well, when Fear of Flying was published in England, Paul Theroux called me a mammoth pudenda in the New Statesman. I never forgot that. But what I think makes male critics so angry, male authors, is they always thought that they had the right to write the story of the vagina, the talking vagina. And we said, no, we're going to write it. And so we dispossessed them of their favorite subject.
Right. Pretty recently, actually. Yeah. Yes. So.
Yes.
Toni?
Well, I think what I would say, without picking out one specific thing, I made an observation when The Surrender was published. For those of you who don't know, it's a very graphic sexual book about sodomy. And it was very positive. So a heterosexual woman being positive about that really freaked people out. But specifically, what I noticed is that it was only, with one sole exception in this country, reviewed by women, which my assumption is, these all could be wrong, it was only assigned to women, because if a man said, I love this book about getting ass fucked, the New York Times would have been
Well, I love this book about
feminists.
a woman enjoying getting ass fucked.
Yes, if a man said this is great, because it was a pretty dirty book. So, and what women did, back to a little bit of what we were talking about before, women in this country wanted to separate themselves from me. They sort of said, it's got a few good points and everything, but without a doubt, it was kind of an interesting thing and also a disappointment. Like, 20, 30 women all kind of said the same thing, which is, whatever she's saying, it might be funny, it might be well written, but that's not me. And I know that I may not be any of those writers. One of them's come to me since and said she got it totally wrong. But that women were very kind of, I don't want to say prudish. And what was interesting is in other countries, I'm sure you've had this experience, not at all. Brazil, France, Italy, completely different attitudes.
So was it reviewed by men in those countries?
Yes, by men as a philosophical treatise, as a manifesto, as a love story. Not a single American review mentioned the love story. It was an obsessive love story, and the word love didn't come into a single review. People so shocked by the type of sex I talked about.
So, Erica, did you get different kinds of reviews in different
I have
countries?
always been reviewed much more interestingly and smartly in Europe, in Asia. America is curiously puritanical.
Oh, curious.
That is one of the reasons.
Famously puritanical.
Famously puritanical, but obsessed with sex and horrified at the same time.
I'm never sure whether Europe is genuinely less puritanical, or culturally, its cultural discourse is certainly less puritanical. Yes. I'm not sure in their hearts of hearts.
I think they're differently afraid of sex.
Yeah. I'm on a much sort of different, it wasn't a book, I wrote what seems like many years ago, although this piece haunts me much more than anything I've ever written about Virginia Woolf. I wrote a piece for the New Yorker on erotic spanking, and the response to it was in the New Yorker, and the response to it was enormous. I got a mammoth amount of letters, including from a nun.
What did that letter say?
She wanted to get together.
Really? Did you get together?
No. I don't think I got together with one. I got together with one. I got hundreds of letters, many from women who said they were relieved to read about this. Men wrote differently. They either read it as this was before online dating was, They either read it as a personal, including one which I was questioned, my mothering was questioned. And I was thinking, would anyone question John Updike's fathering when he wrote about pink labia? No, certainly not. And the other thing I did discover is once, which I think is not true for men who write about erotic matters, once as a woman you write about sexual matters, you remain a woman who writes about sexual matters, no matter what else you go on to write about.
For the rest of your life.
It's always the piece that comes up, which is interesting to me, that somehow it's hard, I think specifically, I mean, years later, it was true, it was another sexual piece. I wrote a piece for the Times, the old Saturday Ideas section. It was a piece about the first psychoanalytic gathering on sadism. Sadists generally don't seek out therapy, masochists do. Sadists are usually pretty happy with themselves. And I wrote a kind of interesting, I went to the session, the Panelists, and wrote up a whole thing, and it was put on the front page, and at the last minute it was pulled. Howell Raines was the editor at that point, because someone said that I had written, I think it was 12 years earlier, a spanking piece in the New Yorker. I don't know why that made it illegitimate, but that was the reason I was given.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
That is really amazing.
Well, my trajectory is a little bit different in that I came up in the alternative press, which doesn't exist in quite the same way it did in the mid to late 90s. And so I was writing a nonfiction column, autobiographical column, about my life called Female Trouble. I did not name the column. I wouldn't have named my column a synonym for menstruation. The choice had been given to me. My editors were male, and they were from Baltimore, and they kept saying, it's a John Waters reference, John Waters' movie, Female Trouble. But it's relevant to this because I've often been in the position of my mentors being men, the people giving me work as a writer being men, editors being men, and then later when I had my first novel come out, it was called Run, Catch, Kiss. This was 1999. My editor, and I believe did this benevolently as a marketing, wanted the book to sell, came up with the subtitle, A Gratifying Novel. So on the cover of my book, it said Run, Catch, Kiss, A Gratifying Novel, and my name. And what was so interesting about it is it was this, to me, what bothered me, market the book however you want. I mean, none of us have any control. Frequently, we have no control over our covers. That's a whole other conversation we could have about the visuals of how we're marketed as women or people who write about sex. But what was interesting to me was, whose voice is saying a gratifying novel? Is it me? Is it my protagonist? What is that voice on the front? And there's a reason it's just, normally you just have a title, when you're doing fiction anyway, you just have a title and a name, because the title really isn't supposed to have a voice. But of course now we put blurbs on the cover because it'll do anything you've got another writer's name on your own cover, which is painful. But anyway, when I was writing for New York Press, it was a free weekly newspaper in these boxes on the corner. I had just graduated college. I was in my early 20s. And the whole Monica Lewinsky thing was happening. And the paper had a policy of publishing almost every letter that it received. In fact, many people who wound up writing for the paper began as letter writers to the paper. And so I would go on whenever it was, every Tuesday, I would get, the paper from one of these green boxes on the street, and I was working as a temp and an actress, a temptress, and I would read my column. I don't think I read my column first, I would read the letters first. And the one that so a lot of them were saying that I was like Monica Lewinsky. There was a lot of misogyny tied into anti-Semitism.
In what way were you like Monica Lewinsky?
That she just represented a sexual Jewish young woman. I was in her age demographic, and I was writing.
See, I think this is a big part of what we're talking about, is that if women talk about sex, then they just become a big, huge whore, basically. Right? I mean, that's just
become
like,
a type
yeah, they.
more than themselves.
Well, that's what I didn't even totally understand. I mean, what is Monica? I think what you're saying is like, what did Monica mean as a marker beyond the most?
Well, I mean, you presumably didn't.
Part of it was anti-Semitism that wasn't very coded even.
But presumably you didn't fillet Bill Clinton in the Oval Office, so nor were you a. I mean, I'm just assuming.
The columns were very self-deprecating, and they were about frustration.
But I mean, you weren't a White House intern. That's nuts. I mean,
She was Jewish and sexually out there.
Right. And in my early 20s.
Thus,
The age
Monica
that-
Lewinsky.
you think Jewishness was?
Oh, definitely,
yeah.
definitely,
That
of course.
is always part of it.
And also, you have to remember, this is a very strange paper. This was an alternative paper that had a very strong libertarian streak. So there were a lot of the people that read the paper they were not the readers of the Village Voice. It had a really odd readership. But one of the letters that I read, and my parents live in New York City, and so they were, this was all pretty much before the internet, and so they would read my columns and be horrified both at whatever, escapade I had gotten myself into, and the horrible things that people were saying about me in the letters published by my own bosses, my editor and my publisher. And one of them said, most of the columns were about going on a date and having sex and being upset and feeling lonely and sad. And
Like Monica Lewinsky, right?
Yeah. And so one of them said, Amy Sohn's cunt must smell like a dried up fish that's been rotting in the garbage for a week. And when I read it, and this is around probably 1996 or 1997, because Erica said pudenda, so I was saying, maybe that's how far we've come. We've gotten from pudenda to cunt. But when I read it, first I cried at how sad I was that someone had written that about me and been published in my own paper. And then I just thought about my father reading it. And I just felt so bad for my parents. It was a precursor of what we now have as sort of internet culture. I now think that if I had had that column, it probably would have been a blog. And so the alt press and its sort of like, large letters sections, I think was a precursor of what we now have.
Right. So now you would have a million comments, but a million comments, many of them involving fish.
That a literary work makes people zero in on your vagina.
Yeah.
As if there were no words,
So
if you were nothing but a vagina.
I have to say, this is actually something that I wanted to bring up. Toni Bentley has gone on public tirades against the use of the word vagina, and I think it's time to.
I'm ready to do another one.
Yes, I think we should.
Yes, and it's been set up here. It's very simple. As you know, we have Eve Ensler, Lena Dunham, all very smart women, Oprah Winfrey. Vagina, 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 vagina. Like this is, I don't know, some kind of a liberation. Vajayjay, we can't even say it. But no, I'm going to tell you, and I hope you know this is true. This is absolutely
She's published
insane.
in the New York Times.
It
so
is
it's
the
definitely
wrong
true.
word.
Yeah.
Naomi Wolf wrote an entire big thick book with the wrong title. What we are referring to is our vulva. It is not the vagina. The vagina is the little short thing inside that women don't really have a lot of feeling in, so that we can have babies without literally dying.
But you,
Let me just finish. It is the part, interestingly, that produces babies, very important, and that is what gives men the most pleasure during intercourse.
well, so as you know,
If you go, black, white, red, yellow, and then you say penis, everyone's going to say vagina. Wrong. It's clitoris. Why is this word not on our tongues all the time? I have a show and tell, seriously. The clitoris has been completely forgotten, and it starts in sex ed, where we're taught ovaries, fallopian tubes, menstruation, uterus, and maybe there's a penis. Nobody teaches you have a clitoris. That's like leaving out a penis. Our entire culture is built around penises. Calling it a vagina is like calling a man's penis his balls. It's that wrong.
If I may, do you know what the word vagina literally means in Latin? It means sheath.
Yes.
It's what you put your sword into.
It's the little
It is. That's what it is.
It doesn't have a lot of
That's why.
feeling, and it can participate in an orgasm, but it's not the source of it. I was recently in France and gave a talk at MIT, and I have something to show you. Now, I don't know how. Can you all see this? Do you know what this is? How many people, in all honesty, don't recognize this?
I thought it was a chicken wing.
This is an unerect. We get erect like you guys. We have more tissue than you guys. The tip is what everyone thinks, the little bit on the outside, if you're lucky with a man, and women mostly know that's the part. We have, look at this thing. We have two bulbs that go around the vagina, explaining what's called a vaginal orgasm, and we have these two wings, and everything grows in the same similar tissue to a penis with blood when we're excited. Now, what I want to say about this is, by the way, a free 3D printed download. You can arrange whatever. And I painted it with nail polish, and it's possibly the first one in America. It was created by a French socio-medical researcher for sex ed in French schools. And symbolism, I mean, it's all very funny, and it's very good to know that, we have one at least as big as yours. However, what is really, really important to me is the incredible symbolism that women don't know they have this. Of course, men don't know. I mean, I've given up, like I said. But women need to know this is what it's called.
This will be
and
on
this is what
display
it looks
later
like.
on.
Yes. Well,
So we can, yes, we'll be on display.
and I just need to finish, the misinformation in our incredible age of sexuality everywhere, and hookups, and endless articles, and Cosmo.
But
Most women don't know this is what it is. It's like man not knowing his penis. This is the symbolism of our disempowerment.
But most women, including the problem is that most women, I recently did a piece.
It's absolutely beautiful.
Called The Future of Sex, based on this book called Future Sex by someone named Emily Witt, and another book called American Hookup that's coming out. And the problem goes beyond whether or not women recognize or are familiar with their clitorises, because most young women are mostly oriented to pleasing men, young men. They're still, it's all about blowjobs. I mean, if you talk to young women, as I have done, they're not invested in their own pleasure. I don't think that has enormously changed.
It's incredible. It hasn't enormously changed since Simone de Beauvoir wrote The Second Sex in 1949. Erica Jong, you started to say something. You unfortunately said the word vagina. And then the floor from you, please.
In Fear of Flying, I used cunt in deference to Chaucer, whom I love. And I thought I could rehabilitate this wonderful Middle English word, quainta, cunt, and make it pure again. I failed.
I love the word.
I love the word too.
Me too.
And
cunt. It's very powerful. I have a girlfriend who says there's good cunts and there's bad cunts. You want to be a good cunt, and it's a powerful word. It's simply about definition.
So,
Sorry.
Bring back cunt.
Bring back cunt, yes.
Yes.
I think we're all
And bring back clitorises.
What I was going to, when we were talking earlier about Henry Miller and Philip Roth and John Updike, what I think is interesting about all of us in our work, in some of the way that we've written about sex, is to me writing about sex has always been connected to writing about rage. And I don't think that traditionally, like the men you were talking about, the way that they wrote about sex was not coming from rage. it was, I mean, that's like a whole other conversation we could have, but the sexual experiences I was writing about in my early 20s were about my frustration with the way I was being treated, the frustration with the level of my pleasure. And yet, I was at an age where I'd keep making the same mistakes over and over again. And so, there was always a feeling that I knew better, and yet I kept getting myself into the same depressing and horrible situations. And so, I feel that when I guess this is something I want to just open up to the other speakers is, what is the function about writing about sex as a woman? What other things does it allow us to do when we write about sex, and what are we ultimately writing about? How is sex a tool to write about other issues?
Does it necessarily have to be a tool to write about other issues?
Partly
Sex
it's
and
about
God and death. Hello.
right. Partly it's
And they're all
about
connected.
demystification. I mean, we all, in the end, we don't know about other people's sex lives. We can guess at them. It remains a secret. We're all interested in secrets. I mean, the bigger secret is money. Other than that, there's sex.
And death.
But death isn't a secret
Oh, it
in
is.
that kind of way. I mean, it's not a secret. We just don't know anything about it. But it's not something people strive to not tell other people about. People keep their sex lives in general pretty secret, as they keep their financial affairs pretty secret.
I thought it was important to write about sex because I felt that the woman's story had not been told. And that part of liberation, and there was no rage in this, really, because I had always been with men who cared about my pleasure. I must be a freak, but I had. And I thought it was important for women to tell their experience. Why should they not? Honesty is important. And for me, literature is about honesty.
So, one thing that in preparing for this evening and reading the works of I noticed that all of our panelists refer to the zipless fuck. And I think that, I was amused by the French version because it made me think about why that phrase became so iconic. And I think one of the reasons is that it's just such an elegant phrase. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just so phonetically, it's so concise.
But I always viewed it as a fantasy.
Right, so this is...
As a platonic ideal.
Oh dear, I took her seriously.
But that in fantasy, you would merge completely with
right,
this
without leaf
lover.
removal.
And zipless because the clothes just floated away.
So it's a fantasy, and in fact, I just reread Fear of Flying recently, and I noticed that towards the end of the book, there's Isadora Wing has an encounter with a man, and she thinks, oh no, that could have been it. But of course, he's kind of a sexual harasser. I mean,
yes.
And so I wonder, because all of the women here on this panel use that phrase and refer to your work, and I'm wondering what happened to that fantasy. Do we still have that fantasy? Has it become internet sex? Has it become hookup culture? What is it? Is that still a viable fantasy? I mean, I certainly notice that it remains a prevalent, iconic touchstone in women's writings about heterosexual sex.
Isn't the zipless fuck sex with the perfect stranger?
Yes.
How has that been outdated?
I'm wondering, I'm asking you, how has it been outdated? I don't know. It seems like with Grindr and Tinder and all those things.
I'm too old for...
Me too, that's why I don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm told by the young people that,
maybe sex with the perfect stranger
you can
is
get it,
super available.
it's available on your
How many perfect
smartphone.
strangers are there?
Don't ask me, I don't know.
Very few.
Very
You
few.
know what's interesting though is then also on the college campuses, there's so much talk about consent that it seems like we're coming, totally.
That's
That's
the
a
other
very
way.
opposite idea of sex, which is, on campuses that have affirmative consent.
Because that seems like a zipful fuck.
It's every stage of the interaction being verbally pre-negotiated. And so I wonder whether the idea of that kind of quiet, don't need to talk, merging, I don't even know whether that's an ideal for people anymore.
Well, in your in Isadora Wang's description, it concludes with, of course, the zipless fuck. Yeah, it has to be with a man you don't know.
And she says in the book, and I have never had one.
Right.
So it's sort of an ideal of perfect merging. And you look for it, but do you find it?
So between internet apps and consent rules, has this idea gone out the window, or are we all too old to even opine on this?
But there's the alternate idea that we're all brought up with, which is that healthy sex is sex within intimacy, not the zipless fuck.
Right, so the zipless fuck is like if I understand correctly, a female version of what is generally taken to be a male fantasy.
To be a male fantasy.
No?
Who knows? I wouldn't make
Well, I would have thought that
I wouldn't make it either female or male. I mean, we all have this fantasy of finding the perfect fit, the perfect fantasy, the person we're meant to be with.
But then they don't know you.
Yes, if you don't.
They don't know you quite.
It's a fantasy.
Wonderfully.
I want to say a couple of things. First of all, I want to say that I didn't read Fear of Flying until I was out of a sexless marriage. And I want to pay tribute to the incredible sense of freedom, both sexually, it's all your fault, in other words, and as a writer that I got from reading that book. I also want to say, in my own experience, I believe that zipless fuck can happen, but it requires many components and certainly very specific kinds of people. In The Surrender, I wrote about, in a sense, that whole book was with the same man, but it was one big zipless fucking your ass. But they because I never really knew him, and I was kind of studying. I come from a scientific family, so I have my own sort of butchered version of that, which is having my life, but also watching it. And in there, I noticed that the thing, like for example, we weren't monogamous. We didn't know what each other were doing all the time. When he came in, we were in a bubble, a four walls with no windows and no doors. Is that not the fantasy? I have found it's not that easy,
No
and there's
windows
a
and no
price,
doors?
but one can pay.
How'd you get in?
You go in the door and you close it, and you listen
So
to
there was
letter
a door.
coming.
Okay. There was a door.
Yes, but the idea is, like, with this man for many years, our only purpose was to have sex. I was berated. Why aren't you having dinner? Why aren't you dating? I'm like, dating ruins sex. What I mean is, start talking to them, and it all goes out the window. And by the time you get home, you're fighting and you're annoyed with him because everyone is annoying.
Okay, we're going to turn over the audience in a moment. I have one more question for you,
Yes.
which is, you did something, all of these women have done incredibly outrageously perceived as outrageous things, for which they have been called things like massive pudenda. But you did something that is just so astonishing that I have to ask you about it, which was you consented to sit at a desk on camera reading the opening pages of Henry James's Portrait of a Lady while someone under the table brought you to orgasm. And I want to know what on earth you were thinking and what the entailments of this remarkable. And so they have. You have an article that she wrote about this?
Yeah, I wrote an article.
I think you should. I would encourage everyone to actually, since it's public and on the web, to watch it. as I did, because it's quite a remarkable thing, and I just want to know what the hell you thought were doing. It's just amazing. You
Well,
have to
very,
watch it.
I know time is short. Very briefly, it's many of you might know it. It was a series that went viral by a very interesting man called Clayton Cubitt. A woman behind a desk, dressed, stationary camera, no nudity, no graphic anything, reading something of her choice, and under the table she's being stimulated with what's called Big Buzzy, the original vibrator, the one that they use in porn because you cannot not come. It's made by Hitachi and it's plugged into the wall. It can't even operate on batteries, it's so powerful. But and I have never experienced this, but the reason I wanted to do it is multifold. I'll tell you quickly. First of all, reading and sex are my two favorite things. So let's put them together. And also, it was, I read a section of Portrait of a Lady with Isabel Archer, a great heroine of mine, and I knew Henry James never gave anybody any orgasm, so I delighted in the idea of giving her one while I was reading about her. A woman who affronted her destiny, was born to affront her destiny, and I feel like I connect to that. What is very interesting about these videos is, first of all, you get there's, I think, 11 or 12 of them. I'm one of them. You get an absolute bona fide female orgasm, all different. In porn, you probably never, sometimes maybe get one, and of course in our movies you never do. So it's a phenomenon. You can go online and see what a real one looks like. It's
So
not
yeah,
fake.
you say in the article it's a money shot. It's a real money shot.
It's absolutely real, and they're all real. And also, it was an interesting experiment. Most women are probably have the experience that I've had many, many times, which is you're usually praying to come. Like, can I come? Will he stay there long enough? Is it going to happen? I'm almost there. Oh, God, he stopped. Oh, God, she stopped. Right? Whereas men are thinking about, baseball and Donald Trump to try and not come. So the interesting thing where like a scientific study is this was the opposite, and it shows, orgasm happens here, of course. I mean, it needs this, but it happens here. Is that you are trying to read. I mean, you're really trying to read. You're not trying to come. You're trying to hold off the orgasm. And it comes on like Mount Rushmore. And it's a very interesting, I can't speak to this, a scientist would have to, of how female orgasm happens in the head, that disassociation is an interesting thing about, I'm interested in the ideas of how women resist orgasm. And that's sometimes the pleasure, but there's a certain amount of masochism to that, I think.